My name is Alexandra. I'm 32 years old, and I've lived through the worst betrayal of my life. But that night was only the beginning. What came next was far worse, the battle for my daughter. It started when my flight was moved up because of a storm. I wasn't supposed to be home that night, but fate had other plans. I slipped quietly into the apartment, eager to kiss my little girl and surprise my husband. The first thing I did was tiptoe into Natalie's room. She was 3, sound asleep with her stuffed rabbit, her tiny body curled beneath the blanket. I remember touching her hair, feeling the warmth of her forehead, and thinking how safe she was in her dreams. Then I went to our bedroom. The door was half closed, the light spilling in a thin strip across the floor. I pushed it open, expecting Anthony. And there he was. But he wasn't alone. My husband was in bed with my sister, Audrey. Under the same roof where my daughter slept. The sight froze me to the marrow. Not just because it was my husband. Not just because it was Audrey. But because this was my family, my blood, tearing me apart from the inside. Before I continue, tell me in the comments, have you ever been betrayed by the very people you thought you could trust forever? Subscribe, because what you've heard so far is only the beginning. This isn't just a story about infidelity. This is about revenge, survival, and the fight for a child who means everything. That night shattered my marriage, my family, and the life I thought I had built. But it also lit a fire in me I never knew existed. This is the story of how I fought, for justice, for my daughter, and for myself. And it all began with that single door, half closed, and the light spilling onto the carpet. I was born first, but I never felt like the eldest. From the moment my younger sister Audrey came into this world, the spotlight shifted. She was radiant in a way I never was. Not smarter, not kinder, but dazzling, like a spark that everyone else wanted to touch. Our parents adored her. That's not to say they didn't love me, but love isn't the same as adoration. For me, there were expectations, responsibilities, checklists to complete. For Audrey, there were indulgences. She was allowed to stay up later, skip chores, get out of trouble with a single smile. I grew up with rules, she grew up with applause. When we were children, I remember how every holiday photo seemed to turn into an Audrey showcase. She would be placed in the middle, our mother fixing her hair, our father lifting her chin to capture the angle that showed her big blue eyes. I stood beside her, smiling dutifully, my hand awkwardly resting on her shoulder. Nobody ever meant to push me aside, but that's how it felt. Year after year, I was the shadow standing next to their golden child. I didn't resent her beauty, not at first. How could I? We were sisters. But I did resent the way everyone else responded to it. Teachers forgave her missing homework. Boys carried her books. Even strangers at the grocery store stopped my mother to say, "What a gorgeous little girl." Nobody ever said that about me. I had my own strengths, grades, determination, the ability to sit down with a textbook and master it. But those things don't get applause at the dinner table. They earn a nod, maybe a good job. Meanwhile, Audrey could crash the family car at 17 and still end up with an affectionate hug. By the time I went to college, I was used to fighting for every inch of recognition. Audrey, on the other hand, was already being courted by modeling scouts. She had just turned 20 when she signed with her first agent, dropping out of college without a backward glance. The whole family celebrated as if she had won the lottery. I sat through dinners where my parents gushed about her photo shoots and campaigns, how she was finally living her dream. No one asked about my courses, or the late nights I spent interning at a local law office just to get experience. My mother once said to me, half joking, "Well, darling, you've always been the sensible one." Audrey was born to shine. Sensible. That was my word. Beautiful belonged to Audrey. And then there was Anthony. We met in a seminar on constitutional law during my junior year. He wasn't the loudest in the room, or the most charming, but he had a quiet intensity one recognized. He noticed me. Not my grades, not my ability to take notes, but me. I remember the first time he offered to walk me back to my dorm after class. Audrey had just been featured in a regional fashion magazine, and the entire family chat was exploding with photos. My phone buzzed in my pocket with message after message about how stunning she looked. And there was Anthony beside me, asking if I liked sushi, telling me about his younger brother, laughing in a way that made me forget my sister even existed for an hour. For once, I wasn't the other one. I was just Alexandra. We started dating slowly, carefully, the way you build something solid. Study sessions turned into dinners. Dinners turned into weekends together. He never treated me like a shadow. He held my hand as if it was the most natural thing in the world, and when he looked at me, there was no comparison in his eyes, only certainty. Of course, Audrey met him eventually. She sized him up with the same sharp interest she gave to any new presence in my life. She teased me, playfully at first, about his quiet manner, his serious clothes, his ambition. But later, I would recognize those moments for what they were, the beginning of her curiosity. Audrey didn't like when something, or someone, belonged to me. Back then, though, I dismissed it. She was my sister. Family doesn't cross those lines. Or so I believed. Anthony and I graduated together. We both took jobs as legal assistants, climbing slowly but steadily, paying our dues. We rented a small apartment, shared takeout dinners, and dreamed about the future. When he proposed, it wasn't in some grand, cinematic way. He simply knelt in our living room one night, holding a ring he'd saved for, and said, "Alex, I don't want a life without you." I said yes without hesitation. For once, I felt chosen. But as I stood there with the ring on my finger, Audrey was still in the background, glowing in her world of cameras and adoration. She came to the engagement party in a designer dress I couldn't afford in 3 years' salary. Our parents clinked glasses to her latest campaign before they remembered to toast our future. It should have been a warning. But I was too blinded by love, by hope, by the belief that my hard work and loyalty would protect me. If only I had known that the shadow I thought I'd escaped was only waiting for the right moment to consume me again. When Natalie was born, I thought I had finally stepped into the light. She was so small, so impossibly delicate, but the moment I held her, I felt like every fight, every dismissal, every shadow I had ever lived in suddenly made sense. She was the reason I had endured it all. Anthony cried when he first saw her, though he tried to hide it behind a nervous laugh. Our parents came to the hospital, showering us with flowers and balloons, snapping photos of the three of us like we were the perfect little family. For a short while, I believed we were. But nothing in my life ever stayed perfect for long. Only a few weeks after Natalie came home, Audrey landed a new contract. It wasn't just any job, it was a major campaign in Japan. The kind of glossy, high-profile deal that made agents salivate and photographers circle like hawks. My parents were ecstatic. "She's going to conquer Asia," my mother said, her eyes glowing as though Audrey had been crowned queen of the world. My father nodded along, already checking flight schedules. When I asked, half joking, who would help me with the baby while they were gone, they looked almost surprised. My mother kissed my forehead and said, "You'll manage, darling. You've always been so capable." Capable. That word again. The one that excused them from ever having to choose me. So they packed their bags and flew across the ocean with Audrey, while I stayed behind with a newborn pressed to my chest and a laptop glowing on the kitchen table. Days blurred into nights. Natalie cried in the small hours of the morning, and I would pace the apartment with her tiny body against my shoulder, whispering lullabies while emails piled up in my inbox. When she finally slept, I would open my laptop and work through case files, red-eyed and exhausted, trying to meet deadlines without letting anyone at the office know I was drowning. There were moments I thought I couldn't do it. But then I would glance at her crib, at her small hands curled into fists, and I knew giving up wasn't an option. I was her mother. Her protector. Anthony tried in his own way. He worked longer hours, picking up extra cases, pushing himself until he stumbled home past midnight with his tie askew and the weight of the world in his eyes. He told me it was for us, for Natalie's future, for the family we were building. And I believed him. But belief doesn't keep you company at 3 a.m. when the baby won't stop crying and your body aches from exhaustion. Sometimes, when he crept into bed smelling of stale coffee and courtroom dust, I wanted to shake him and scream, "Be here. Help me." But instead, I kissed his cheek, whispered that I was proud of him, and let him fall asleep. Because what else could I do? He was fighting one war, I was fighting another, and neither of us could afford to lose. The truth was, we loved each other. That much I never doubted. We were partners, even if stretched thin. But love doesn't erase loneliness. It doesn't silence the nagging thought that maybe, just maybe, we were already slipping into roles that would one day tear us apart, me, the anchor at home, and him, the man running farther and farther into the world just to prove he belonged. Still, I didn't complain. I told myself I was strong enough, capable enough, to carry it. And for a time, I did. I balanced bottles and briefs, diapers and depositions. I became an expert at working with one hand while holding a baby in the other. When Natalie smiled for the first time, it felt like a victory no court case could ever match. But every milestone I celebrated alone, her first laugh, her first steps across the living room floor, was another reminder that my parents were continents away, applauding Audrey's billboards instead of their granddaughter's first words. I wanted to believe that once the contract ended, they would come back, and things would be different. That they would finally see me, not just as the sensible one, the capable one, but as a mother who deserved the same pride they gave Audrey. But deep down, I already knew the truth. I had known it since childhood. My parents would always choose her. No matter what she did, no matter how I fought, Audrey would always be their golden girl. So I stopped waiting for their approval. I focused on my daughter. On Anthony. On building a life out of sheer willpower, even when it felt like I was doing it with my bare hands. I didn't realize it then, but those lonely nights, those endless days of juggling everything on my own, were preparing me. Teaching me how to stand alone, how to survive when every support vanished. Because one day, when the betrayal finally came, I would need every ounce of that strength. I wasn't supposed to be home that night. My return was an accident of fate, a delayed meeting in Chicago, a storm system that moved faster than expected, and a last-minute seat on an earlier flight. I remember smiling to myself in the cab from the airport, thinking how surprised Anthony would be. I imagined slipping into our bed beside him, pressing a kiss against his shoulder, and waking up as if I had never been gone. When I opened the front door, the apartment greeted me with silence. Not the heavy silence of emptiness, but the muted hush of sleep. I rolled my suitcase gently across the floor, careful not to wake Natalie. My first stop was always her room. I pushed the door open and found her curled up, one arm flung over her stuffed rabbit, her lips parted in a soft sigh. The nightlight painted her face in a golden glow. My heart swelled, she was safe, she was mine. I bent down, kissed her hair, and whispered, "Mommy's home." For a moment, everything was perfect. Then I noticed the light. A thin line of brightness cut across the hallway carpet, leaking from our bedroom door, which stood ajar. Anthony never left the light on at night, he hated wasting electricity. My first thought was that he was still awake, maybe reading. Maybe waiting for me. I pushed the door gently, expecting the soft rustle of pages, the scent of his cologne. Instead, I froze on the threshold. There, tangled in the sheets, were two bodies. Anthony. And Audrey. My mind shattered in silence before my voice could find me. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. The sight was obscene, impossible, and yet it was right there, under the same roof where my daughter slept. Audrey's hair spilled across my pillow, her laugh, low and breathless, cutting through the air like a knife. Anthony's hand traced her skin, the same hand that once held mine when we promised forever. The same bed where I had nursed Natalie, sleepless and exhausted, believing I was building a family. I wanted to scream, to tear the room apart, but instead I stood there, cold and trembling, my body refusing to obey. Betrayal doesn't explode all at once, it seeps, sharp and burning, into every vein. Anthony noticed me first. His face drained of color, his mouth opening, stammering my name. Audrey didn't even flinch. She looked at me with something close to triumph, as if she had been waiting for this moment. The humiliation crashed over me like a wave. My little sister. My husband. My bed. Alex, Anthony started, scrambling upright, tugging the sheet around himself like a shield. This isn't. Don't, I whispered. My voice was so thin I barely recognized it. Don't you dare. Audrey smirked, propping herself up on one elbow, her skin glowing in the lamplight. You came back early, she said, almost casually, as though I had ruined her evening. I turned away, my legs carrying me blindly down the hall before I collapsed against the wall outside Natalie's room. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would split me open. Inside that little room, my daughter slept peacefully, untouched by the poison seeping through our family. The betrayal wasn't just about the affair. It was deeper. It was Audrey taking once more what was mine, what I had worked for, what I had protected. It was Anthony letting her. Choosing her. In that moment, I realized something bone deep, the perfect life I thought I had built was gone. My marriage, my family, it had all crumbled while I was busy believing it was strong. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't sob. Not then. Not yet. Grief would come later, in waves that knocked me breathless. But in that instant, I felt only steel hardening inside me. Because if they thought this would break me, they were wrong. If you've made it this far, pause for a moment. Have you ever been betrayed by the people you trusted most, under the same roof where your child was sleeping? Tell me in the comments, because stories like this don't happen in books alone. And subscribe, because what comes next isn't just about infidelity. This was only the spark. The real fire began with what followed, the war for my daughter, and the revenge that no one saw coming. That night, I left the bedroom without another word. My suitcase still stood by the door, unopened. My daughter still slept in her bed, safe for now. But I knew nothing would ever be safe again. The fight had already begun. I didn't sleep that night. I packed. I moved through the apartment like a trespasser in my own life, pulling a small suitcase from the closet, folding Natalie's pajamas with shaking hands, unplugging the white noise machine that helped her drift off. I worked by habit, by muscle memory, diapers, wipes, her favorite rabbit, a spare pacifier I kept in the nightstand. I left the bigger things, the crib, the rocking chair, like artifacts in a museum of a home I no longer recognized. Anthony knocked once on the bedroom door and then again, softer. Alex, please. We have to talk. I didn't answer. I moved to Natalie's room, lifted her carefully, and felt her settle against me with a trusting sigh that split me open. In the doorway, I turned and looked back. The lamp on our nightstand still burned, washing the bed in a light I suddenly despised. By the time I reached the elevator, my phone vibrated. Anthony, please. I'm sorry. It was a mistake. Another message, where are you taking her? Let's talk like adults. I put the phone on Do Not Disturb and rode down in silence. At the curb, the bellman flagged a cab. I gave the driver the name of a hotel 6 blocks from my office and pressed Natalie closer as if distance alone could keep us safe. At the hotel desk, I gave my card and a name that felt like a stand-in for the person I used to be. The clerk slid over the keycards, offered a polite smile he probably gave everyone, and told me about breakfast hours I wouldn't remember. In the room, I laid Natalie on the bed and watched her breathe. I wanted to cry, to collapse, to scream into a pillow, but even my grief understood there were things to do. I propped my laptop on the desk, opened a blank document, and typed a line that made it real: petition for dissolution of marriage. I wasn't filing yet, I was reminding myself of the path. The word steadied me. At 7 a.m., When the city's light pressed through the blackout curtains, I called my boss, my senior attorney. "I'm sorry to call so early," I said, my voice rough with sleeplessness. "I need counsel. Off the record first, then formal." He didn't ask for details, he'd heard enough from my breath. "Come by when you can, Alex. I'll clear the morning." Before I could put the phone down, a new message from Anthony cut through Do Not Disturb. "I'll do better. I swear it. Don't blow up our family over one mistake." One mistake. Not even our mistake, his. A tidy word for a bomb. I typed back, "I saw enough. This is not a conversation. It's a decision." He called immediately. I let it ring out. When the voicemail alert appeared, I couldn't bring myself to listen. I left Natalie with the hotel's crib service and a sitter the concierge trusted, a woman with warm eyes who introduced herself as Lila and asked thoughtful questions about naps and snacks. I wrote my number on the notepad twice and circled it. Twice. At the office, my boss closed his door and set a legal pad between us. "Tell me what happened." I told him the sanitized version. Not the humiliating details. The facts were enough. He nodded, already thinking 3 steps ahead. "Do you want reconciliation counseling, or are we moving forward?" "We're moving forward," I said. My own certainty startled me. No second chances. Not for this. He didn't argue. He outlined options: temporary custody, emergency orders, preservation of assets, discovery. His voice was the voice I'd leaned on for years in other people's crises. Now it held me up in my own. "Document everything," he said. "Save messages, screenshots, call logs. Start a journal today, dates, times, who said what. Emotions are valid, but courts like facts." "I know," I said, and realized I sounded like a colleague again, not a woman with a shattered life. It helped. When I stepped back into the hallway, my phone lit up like a flare. 23 messages from Anthony. "We can fix this. Don't punish me. Think of Natalie." And then, darker, "If you're filing, I'm fighting for custody. You're never home. You work. I'm the stable parent." There it was, the first strike. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. The old narrative, as predictable as a clock, the working mother who must be neglectful simply because she works. The man who stays late at the office calling himself stable because he decides it's convenient now. I typed slowly, each letter an anchor. "You know that's a lie. I have never neglected our daughter. I've done more alone than you know." I deleted it. Not because it wasn't true, but because truth didn't belong in a thread designed to be weaponized. Instead, I took screenshots. I saved them to a folder labeled custody. I added a time-stamped note to my new journal, 8:42 a.m. Anthony threatens custody, alleges neglect due to work. False. Back at the hotel, I found Natalie awake in the crib, Lila kneeling beside her with a stack of blocks. She ate a little, Lila said. We took a short walk in the hall. She laughed at the ice machine. "Thank you," I said, and meant it more than those 2 words could carry. After Lila left, I held my daughter on the carpet and watched her stack and topple her world. She clapped for herself, unbothered by gravity. I tried to learn from her. By noon, Anthony had shifted tactics. "Let's set rules. 1 week on, 1 week off. Be reasonable." I could almost hear the rehearsed calm, the thin veneer of co-parenting he hoped a judge would like. I wrote, "All future communication through counsel." Then I sent my attorney's email and put the phone face down. The afternoon was a blur of practicalities. I opened a new bank account. I changed passwords. I requested a copy of our lease and located the safe deposit key. I printed a checklist for temporary orders and highlighted the sections that mattered most: primary physical custody, parenting time, decision-making authority. The words were sterile, but they were the scaffolding for the life I intended to rebuild. When Natalie napped, I let myself feel the edges of anger. It didn't roar, it didn't blaze. It burned clean and steady, like a pilot light I could rely on. I remembered the way Audrey had looked at me, unflinching, satisfied, and I pressed the feeling down into something useful. Anthony's final message came just before dusk: "You're being dramatic. Audrey cares about Natalie. Maybe she's the female influence you never had time to be." The audacity stole my breath and then gave it back as something sharper. I didn't reply. I saved it. That evening, I ordered room service pasta and ate 2 bites. Natalie finger-painted the high-chair tray with marinara, and for a minute we both laughed like the world hadn't ended. After her bath, I read Goodnight Moon twice and hummed her to sleep, wondering how many times I had done exactly this while my parents were on another continent cheering for Audrey's newest billboard, while Anthony promised the future from a desk I rarely saw. When the room finally quieted, I opened the journal again. Decision, formalized, no reconciliation. Retain counsel. Seek temporary primary custody. Anthony positioning, claims I'm a working mother who neglects. False, documented history of caregiving, work-from-home flexibility, and primary nighttime care. Next, prepare affidavit. Collect pediatrician records, daycare logs, photos, texts. Ask Lila for a statement about today. I closed the notebook, and the line between my life and my cases blurred in a way that, for once, saved me. This was not a story I would survive by softness. It would be lists, records, dates, the quiet, relentless proof of what a mother does when no one is watching. I slept in short, brittle pieces. Somewhere in the dark, I dreamed the elevator doors of our building opened and I saw myself standing inside, older, sharper, carrying Natalie on one hip and a stack of files on the other. The doors closed on the old world without me. In the morning, my boss texted, "Draft ready by noon. Come sign." I showered, dressed, and tied my hair back. I put Natalie in a yellow sweater because it made her look like sunlight. On our way out, the phone buzzed with a new thread, this time from my mother. "Call me. Your father and I have thoughts about what's best for Natalie." Another from my father followed, "Don't be emotional. Audrey and Anthony can offer her a stable household. Think of her future." My grip tightened on the stroller handle until my knuckles ached. They spoke of stability as if Audrey's life wasn't a carousel of airports and handlers and temper. As if they had forgotten Japan 3 years ago, the tantrums on set, the late arrivals, the temper that agencies whispered about. As if they hadn't heard Anthony the past year, bitter and exhausted, complaining that cases passed him by and he was burned out because the partners didn't trust him with anything bigger. I didn't answer them. Not yet. Their version would have its day, and so would mine. The truth had a way of sounding quiet until it reached the right room. I pressed the elevator button and looked down at my daughter. "We're okay," I told her softly. "We're going to be okay." The door slid open. I pushed the stroller into the elevator and lifted my chin, already hearing the next argument forming in my parents' voices, already seeing Audrey's name in their texts like a banner I had lived under my whole life. Fine. Let them talk. Let them tell me to hand over my child to the very people who shattered our home. I tightened my grip on the stroller and drew a steady breath. I would not bend. I would not break. I would fight. A month passed before I set foot in that apartment again. By then, the paperwork was complete, the divorce petition, the custody requests, the affidavits. Everything neatly filed, every date and message catalogued. I was ready. I only returned for one reason, to deliver Anthony his copy. To place it in his hands so he couldn't pretend he hadn't seen it. But when I walked through the door, it wasn't just Anthony waiting. My parents were there, sitting stiffly on the couch. Audrey too, draped across the armchair as though she owned the place. They'd gathered like a tribunal, a stage set for judgment. Anthony stood first. He didn't look at me with shame anymore, he wore defiance, the kind of bravado that comes after a month of convincing yourself you're the victim. "Alex," he said, "if you had given me a chance, we wouldn't be here. But you slammed the door. So I moved on. Audrey and I are together now. We're building something real. I glanced at my sister. She didn't even blink. Just crossed one perfect leg over the other and tilted her chin, as though daring me to speak. My mother's voice broke the silence. Alexandra, be reasonable. Think of Natalie. She deserves a normal family, not this chaos. Audrey and Anthony can give her stability, love. A home. My father nodded. You've always been the capable one, the worker. But motherhood requires presence. You've been too focused on your career. Isn't it better for Natalie to grow up where both parents are under one roof? It was all rehearsed, their lines polished, the narrative set. I was the cold career woman, too busy for her child. They were the loving family, ready to raise Natalie together. I placed the divorce documents on the table, slowly, deliberately. My hands were steady. My voice was not raised when I spoke. Do you want to talk about stability? I asked. Then let's talk about the truth. Anthony frowned. Alex? No, I cut him off. You don't get to frame this. You want to fight dirty, let's lay it out. Your career? You're burning out, and the partners barely trust you even with small cases. Audrey? She lost her manager months ago and hasn't booked a real job since. And you, I turned to my parents, you're retired. You've been living off pensions that barely cover your expenses. And you expect me to hand over my daughter to all of you? Tell me, who here is actually capable of raising a child? The silence cracked across the room. My mother's lips parted, then closed. My father's jaw tightened. Audrey shifted in her chair, the mask slipping just enough to reveal the truth in her eyes. And Anthony looked furious, not because I was wrong, but because I was right. I leaned forward, my voice low and sharp. Here's my offer. Sign the divorce. Agree to custody. Or this gets uglier than any of you can imagine. Courts love records, and I have them all, messages, emails, witnesses. I will not hesitate to expose every crack in the image you're trying to sell. Audrey scoffed. You wouldn't. I held her gaze. Try me. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of my words filled the room, thicker than the air we breathed. Finally, Anthony looked down at the papers on the table, his hands twitching at his sides. I straightened, lifted my chin. I'm not asking. I'm telling you. This ends here. With me, my daughter, and a future you don't get to control. I picked up my bag, turned without another word, and left them sitting there, silent, exposed, and powerless. The day I signed the lease on the little house felt like breathing after years underwater. It wasn't large, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that opened into the living room, a patch of yard where Natalie could run barefoot in the grass. But it was ours. Not borrowed, not shadowed by betrayal. A place where every corner would be built on my terms. I painted Natalie's room a soft yellow and let her scatter her toys across the floor. She twirled in the sunlight that poured through the window, her laughter bouncing off the fresh walls. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Work adjusted too. My firm agreed to let me transition into full remote hours, something I had once worried would brand me as less committed. But my boss, the same man who steadied me in those early days, reminded me that results matter more than desks. I set up a home office, soundproofed just enough to separate depositions from bedtime stories. I became both, professional and mother, on my own terms. News about Anthony reached me like whispers carried by the wind. The partners had finally cut him loose. His mistakes, the ones long hidden by a senior partner, had surfaced when scrutiny fell sharper during the divorce proceedings. Missed filings, sloppy work, corners cut. He was escorted out with a box of files and a reputation that wouldn't recover. Audrey, once so dazzling, unraveled quietly. After losing her manager, she tried to claw her way back into campaigns, but the industry had a long memory and little patience for tantrums. She drifted between cities, her social media posts growing erratic, captions more desperate. When I saw her once at a cafe months later, she didn't notice me. She stared at her phone, her reflection a shadow of the girl who once owned every room. My parents, they aged in ways I hadn't noticed before. Retirement felt heavier on them now, stripped of the fantasy that Audrey's success would carry them. Their calls grew softer, their voices careful. They began to ask, not demand, if they could see Natalie. At first I hesitated. The wounds they left were still raw, their loyalty still bent toward the daughter who betrayed me. But then I looked at Natalie, at her curious eyes and her love that hadn't yet learned bitterness. She deserved grandparents, even flawed ones. So I allowed visits, on my terms, in my home. I set the boundaries. They arrived with small gifts, with stories from the past, with a gentleness I rarely saw when I was a child. Maybe it was guilt, maybe love, maybe both. I didn't care to untangle it. For Natalie's sake, I let them be present, but I never forgot who had stood against me. Evenings in the house became rituals of healing. Dinner at the table, Natalie's chatter filling the spaces where silence once lived. Bedtime stories where her laughter reminded me that family could be rebuilt, even if the pieces didn't match the old picture. Sometimes I thought of Anthony and Audrey, what they had chosen, what they had lost. I didn't feel triumph. Not exactly. What I felt was steadiness, like the ground beneath my feet was finally solid. Because revenge wasn't fire and fury in the end. It was this. A roof that was mine. A child who was safe. A life no one could take from me again. One night, after Natalie fell asleep clutching her rabbit, I stood at the window of our new home. The moon lit the yard, the air smelled faintly of cut grass, and for the first time in years, the silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. I whispered to myself, barely louder than the night air. We're okay now. We're finally okay. And for once, I believed it.